running up.
Okay. You feel comfortable? Are you as relaxed as you
Yes.
do it? Yeah, good.
Okay, Mark, with speed.
Could you describe how you were captured?
Well, serving on destroyers and things like that, we used to go out of Hong Kong on patrols, etc. And on one occasion, we got torpedoed. We limped back into harbour, put the ship in the dry dock, HMS Thracian, one of the old S&T destroyers. It was dive-bombed, the dock, so we abandoned the ship, as you might say, but the volunteer crew took it out and we beached it. The ship took the guns, the barrels, the breech blocks and all the radar, ASDEC equipment off. I don't know what we're going to do with it, like, but and we about 2 or 3 knots, 5 knots at the most, steamed around the corner of Hong Kong and beached the ship. Dragged the anchor chains and the anchors with pulley blocks and that, wrapped them around boulders and used anything to try to sort of wheel clamp the ship, and came back on a tug into Hong Kong and joined up with the army. We were instructed to go onto these wagons to go up to a place as far as we knew was called Wan Lee Chung Gap, which was a mountain track going up the side of the mountains. This was about 6 o'clock in the morning, and it was a bend in the road. That was the first wagon. It got ambushed. The second wagon tried to overtake it. They got that one. The third wagon sort of went to go to the left of the second one and cut in between, and he got it. So the road was completely blocked. So everybody just scattered, took cover where they could, and tried to kill a few Japs, put it that way. If you saw one, you shot it, you know. And I was wounded 3 or 4 times. Not seriously, but enough for to keep us occupied, as you might say. There was a couple more worse than me, and we lay underneath this wagon with the sideboards down, tailboard, sideboards, and a couple of the lads managed to get up in between the wooden floor and the chassis. You wouldn't think it possible, but in them conditions you were like a beetle, you could get anywhere. And we lay there, could hardly talk because we didn't know what was surrounding us. We lay there till about 9 o'clock at night. Sort of volunteers required for to go for help. I was about the fittest of the lot, so I was nominated for to go for help. So crawled down the road. Must have crawled about half a mile, 3/4 of a mile, and through leafy side of the road. The noise of the leaves were like thunder, you know, you couldn't go quietly. Somebody appeared in front of us. We actually, I think we bumped heads together. And you don't ask questions. I had a revolver. I don't know what he had, but I don't know what he intended doing, but I knew what I was going to do, and I'd done it. Went on about 100 yards, and the next thing I heard was, "Halt, who goes there?" Never played soldiers before, didn't know what this meant, but just took it for granted that if you were a friend, you said friend. You know, in the Common Gardener schoolboy games, advance friend, and be recognised, which I did. And this sentry, or lookout man, he asked us questions, and then he shouted over my head, "All right, Harry, he's okay." And I'd actually passed a lookout man, if you understand what I mean.
Yes, I do. He'd let you go.
He'd let me through, so I was in crossfire, as you might say. And then he turned and shouted down the road, "I have one coming in, friend." So he sort of, with his rifle or whatever it was he had, escorted me about 30 or 40 yards down the road, where I had the honour of meeting the commanding officer of the Hong Kong Volunteers. I've never seen a shambles like it. He had +4s on, he had a trilby hat on, he had like a hacking jacket and a double-barrel shotgun. And there was fellas standing around him, much the same, air rifles, you name it, and that was the Hong Kong Volunteers. They asked us questions, and then shortly after that the Naval Patrol came on the scene, who at the time I knew who some of them were, because I knew partly everybody in the Navy, been out there that long, you know. And one of them said, "Here, Jody, have a drink," which he gave us an army or a naval water bottle, and it didn't have water in, I can tell you. And we were, at least I was parched, so I drank best part of this, and I didn't know much more after that. I seemed to
Rum.
flake out Navy rum. And I woke up in hospital with bandages round here and in the morgue. It was like a morgue. There was turned out to be a convent at a place called Aberdeen, because I've quite.
Aberdeen Harbour.
I forget the actual name of the convent, but there was fellas lying there dying, you know, and all they wanted was a cigarette. And people can talk about giving up smoking and stuff like that, but it's one of the last things a dying man wants, is a cigarette. You'd give a fella a cigarette, he would hold it to his lips, he would give it a couple of puffs, a smile would come on his face, and then he was gone, you know. So his last request was satisfaction. He'd had his final smoke, you know. And funny enough, I've tried to give up smoking for all these years. I have given it up. I've been off for anything up to 5 years, but I still go back. And I get satisfaction out of it. I don't see why I shouldn't, in a matter of respect. But I get wrong off the wife. You know, it's every cigarette is another 5 years off your life. So if I don't smoke, I don't know how old I'm going to be when I snuff it. I mean, I'm 78 now, so that's the way it is for me.
You don't look 70. You really don't look 78. Tell us what happened when the Japanese came in. Presumably the hospital was taken, wasn't it?
Well, they came into the hospital, and as far as I was given to believe, it wasn't the defenders of Hong Kong who surrendered. They did surrender, but it wasn't on their account. You know, like the casualties amongst the armed forces. It was the casualties amongst the civilians. So as like you say, I was actually taken in a hospital ward, a prisoner. Then they shipped us out of this convent to North Point. Then from North Point to Shamshipu, which is the Middlesex Married Quarters Regiment, overall a period of about 5 months. And then they shipped us out of Hong Kong, classed as undesirables, to Japan, which was Yokohama. As you came down the gangplank, first left, next right, and that is the way you got split up.
When did you first realize, because you will have had no idea how the Japanese were going to behave, presumably?
No, they're all cannibals as far as we knew. You know.
When did you first realize that the Geneva Convention had been thrown out of the window?
Well, with the atrocities we heard in, you know, fellas coming into the camp late after me, especially the Royal Scots. Every man Jack that gave himself up, days, weeks afterwards, they were the last of the Royal Scots, and it finished up. I think they had more Royal Scots in the prisoner of war camp than what they had when they started. You know, I must be the last one. I've been up in the hills and this, that and the other. And you hear the atrocities, you know, and you just took it from there that you were fighting an uncivilized race, as you know, the way it was drilled into them.
How were you treated, the prisoners? Was there any difference because you were wounded, because you hadn't...
Didn't make any difference. No.
Tell us how you were...
I mean, for instance, I was taken from one camp in Yokohama to a one nearby Tokyo, like a hospital camp. And I've visualized that having an appendix operation meant that I was going to have 6 or 7 weeks convalescent, which turned out not to be. A day and a half after I'd had the operation, I went out to work. And the job I got was in a sauna dockyard, operating a 70-ton steam hammer. And you can imagine what we lifted, like a perambulator handle up. This big block went up, and when you dropped it, it came down, and it would flatten anything. And you got to such a point of being an operator on it, you could make it just sort of vibrate within fractions of an inch off the article, you know, that you were trying to flatten, which had come out of a furnace prior to going under the big hammer, you know. And of course, if you had a big bang, it used to shake your whole body up. It was more nerve-wracking to me than anything else.
There must be a whole catalogue of horrific pictures that you carry in your mind. Do they
Yes.
Do they still come back to haunt you?
Yes, inasmuch as prior to the operation, which was going to be performed, as far as I was given to understand, by a Dr. Kaufman, who was a nationalised American, hence the name Kaufman, which I took it to be German. And he was marvellous as a surgeon, like maybe promoted from a doctor because he had to do these jobs. And he was going to operate on me for appendicitis. And at the last minute, the only means of putting me over, they had no injections and stuff like that, was pouring chloroform onto a rag and just putting it across your mouth. And I was actually drinking this stuff, because it turned out that I was given to understand that this stuff had been sent by the Red Cross and the government to Japan for the 1926 earthquake or something that they had. And they were still using the same ether. And it had no strength whatsoever. I was more or less drunk on this ether. You know what I mean? And the last memory I had was the doors opening, and this Japanese officer standing there, full regalia on, and he says, "I will perform." And with that, he took his Sam Brown belt off and his jacket, put a green apron on, and he done the operation. We knew him as the cowboy, and he was a cowboy.
He wasn't a surgeon at all?
I don't know, but he done the necessary operation, and since then I've been in hospital for different abdominal inspections, or I had gallstones, and whoever was looking at it said, "What's that?" Normally appendix is at an angle, but mine was up the middle for appendix, you know. And I'd say, "Oh, that was appendix operation in a prisoner of war." You know, I nearly swore, but I won't. And they couldn't believe an appendix could be done the way it was done. Like I say, a day and a half after I had it, I went out to work, just with a big elastoplast on.
What was when did you realize that you were in a major fight for survival, and that every fiber of your being was going to have to concentrate on it? How soon after you were captured did you realize that it was a serious business?
I would say within about 3 weeks after being in a prisoner of war camp, because I'm a fellow who likes his food. I don't eat a lot, but what I was getting was inadequate for what I was. A rice bowl first thing in the morning, and a bowl of soup made out of anything, and you got that once a day. And I knew after that if you wanted to live, you had to find food, and we used to pick it up on the side of the road, like in the grass verge. You even think nothing of taking a handful of grass and dandelion leaves, anything, boil it up, make soup, anything, you know.
You must have seen a lot of your comrades just give up and
Oh,
die.
yes, yes.
Was that that was obviously upsetting, but did you gain strength from that? Did you say, I'm going to keep going?
Oh, I did to myself, because it was in latter years, roughly about 2.5 years after being a prisoner of war, that my father and mother got to know I was alive. They thought I'd either gone or was posted missing. And my mother always said to me and to people, if anybody will survive, he'll survive. Because I come from a family like that, you know.
What do you think it was? Can you try and identify what it was that gave you the strength to survive? Was it thinking of family? Was it one particular longing? Try and define it for me.
Well, it was sort of saying, well, why give up after going through so much when I've got so much at stake, you know? Live for tomorrow, you know. And that's all I did, because we were not necessarily living for tomorrow. We were living to survive till tomorrow. And, I mean, when you realised that you were in a position, you didn't know whether it was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or whatever day it was, because every day was the same, every month was the same, the routine was the same, you know. And at first, when you went on roll call, you stood in single line ahead, you had a number, and when they shouted number, you know, you had to shout this number out according to the position you were in. And if you were number 5, and number 4 or 3 had gone sick, and he wasn't in front of you, naturally your number changed. And you used to have a quick check to find out what that number was, because you were going to shout it out, you know. And eventually became fairly proficient in numbers in Japanese, you know, which has lived with me for years. I can count. I can't tell the time in Japanese, but I can count.
Give us an example.
Senko Akli Yonjuni, 1942, that was my prisoner of war number. Ariata gozaimasu and all this, you know. Byoki, sick. Taksan, plenty. Shigoto, work.
How much brutality was there in the camp? I suppose we all think of Japanese prisoner of war camps as being exceptionally brutal places. Was that the truth of it?
Well, certain instances were brutal, but not as much as what I've heard of what happened in other camps. Now, we had guards running our camps who were like Dad's army. They'd been fighting in Indochina for years. They were Dad's army. They were worse off than what we were. When we came back after a day's work, they used to see us into the camp, searches and stuff like that. And we were bringing stuff in from what had been stolen on a ship out of the big fridge or something like that, off a railway wagon, you know, even peanuts, which is nangi mamis as far as I know in Japanese. We used to bring stuff in for the Japs, you know, and after they'd been to their billeted quarters, after they had a meal, they used to come into the camp looking for whoever brought the stuff in for them. They were the ones that searched that particular line of prisoners. They knew that the carry man, as they were known, was bringing stuff in, and they would just go through the motion of searching them and stuff like that, you know.
So, an element of mutual dependency had
Oh, yes.
by now.
Yes, I mean, we used to trade with the Japanese. We used to play cards, poker, because there was American in our camp. And, I mean, it was amazing, the conversations you would hear after roll call, Tenko at night time. 2 or 3 of them up the toilets talking, how did he get on? Oh, I lost 4,000. And this wasn't cents, it was yen. Because you used to buy into a school and buy buttons. And these buttons were a special button. Nowhere else could you get them except off the lad that kept them. They weren't made for any other purpose other than a sort of a as far as we were gone, the Imperial Palace, you know, the Emperor's staff or whatever it was, and each button represented so much. And when the Japs used to come around, they would see us playing poker, draw poker, stud poker, whatever. We were learning the game from the Americans, which we became pretty efficient at. And they used to say, "Button, dammy, dammy." Playing for buttons, it's a waste of time. You should be playing for O'Carney, which is money. But little did they realise that one of them buttons is equivalent to a month's pay for them. You know, they used to say, "Button, dammy, dammy, O'Carney, Hiroshi, play for money." But they didn't realise, you know.
So, what are your feelings towards the Japanese now, 50 years afterwards? I mean, you.
Well, I've got no hatred for them. Deep down, I've got no love for them, if you understand what I mean. And as far as I know, the Prisoner of War Association runs, well, not the Prisoner of War, but a lady in Croydon in London, Kito Holmes. She runs a pilgrimage to Japan every year. And as far as I know, this is the second or third or the fourth one she's run, which is leaving England on the 29th of October, and I've put my name down for to go.
Would it be fair for me to say that you had a slightly easier time than the people on the
Yes, I
railroad?
definitely, yes. I mean, when you hear about people going to work with cement bags tied around their feet in icy conditions, working in salt mines, working in copper mines and stuff like that, we weren't. The worst we had was working in a brickyard, living in a brickyard, where all you seen every morning was bricks, bricks, bricks. And if I never see a house made of bricks again, I'll be happy, you know, because I lived with it. Nightmare. You dreamt about bricks. On a conveyor belt, wet, slimy, guillotine wire, cutting them and taking them into furnace and that's it. And we went out for a walk at night time, just sort of before roll call. You walked among bricks like a maze of bricks, and that was all it was.
What sort of contact did you have with the Japanese civilians? Presumably
Very little, unless he was what we used to call it, at least we, or I did, called him a carry-out man. After breaking into a railway wagon or something like that, cigarettes that were destined for their frontline troops, wherever they were fighting, were in special wagons. We had fellas that could open a railway cache, pick the seal off, go in, loot the thing, empty boxes underneath full boxes. The Japs used to walk across them and disappear because the one underneath was empty. You know, I mean, we had fellas that talk about modern day crooks and stuff like that. Wouldn't live with some of the lads that we had. I mean, I don't know, the metal seal, like a lead seal, which is a tool's used for crimping it. We had lads that could take that wire seal off and do it, and then the inspector used to come along after our lads and pass it, you know, because they were masters at their trade. A wooden bucket with a false bottom and a bunch of keys in it would open any lock that had ever been made. That was the type of, you know, you were duty bound to take your turn in carrying it out to work and give it to somebody. You would cover him for working while he would be going into cabins, fridges, you name it, stealing, purloining, borrowing it, forget to return it sort of effort. And we used to bring more stuff into the camp for the lads that were in the sick bay, the hospital, than the normal rations, and that's what kept them alive. I mean, if you're in the sick bay and lying in bed at your desk door, you could have salmon, you could have stuff that we brought in a sleeve of a greatcoat, and you know, half a dozen tins of small tins, and trying to salute somebody with, you know, and stuff like that.
You were probably living better than people in Newcastle are or were at the time.
Yes. Well, as I was just talking to the taxi driver, I was 12 stone 7 when I was captured. I was 11 stone 4 when I was released. You know, it was me proper fighting weight, middleweight, and welterweight, you know.
What about the end of the war? You were obviously in Japan when the bombs went off, both of them. What was the reaction? What was the feeling that ran around the camp?
It was a feeling of relief and joy, if you understand what I mean. And instead of going out to work on the back of a truck and the sentry sitting on top of the cab with a machine gun pointing at us, if you understand what I mean, the position was reversed. He was sitting on top of the cab, but his machine gun was pointing forward for any trouble coming from the Japs. He was defending us. You know, the hatred was there. And like you get riots in England, and looting in these places, that was the sort of atmosphere you had. And you had to be careful. I mean, before we used to shout at the Japs and two fingers and this, because we knew I had the sentries on the truck, sort of guarding us. But with the hostility that was around, you had to be careful. You just kept quiet, and that was it.
So how were you liberated? Who were the first people to get to you?
The Americans. It was this camp that I was in was a sort of a hospitalised camp, which was built on reclaimed land. The Americans landed in landing crafts, came up the beach, which was mud. There was all around it, the foreshores you make, was these 50-gallon drums of food, cigarettes, clothing, which the bigger planes had dropped, but they were dropped from such a height that they embedded themselves in the soil, in the mud, and we couldn't get them out. The only way we could get stuff out was a hammer and chisel and cut the lid off where, you know. And as I say, they liberated us. We had these fences round, and only like trellis work, you know, about 12 foot high, just lattice work. And there was that was sufficient to keep us in, because there was no sense in being on the outside, because you couldn't go anywhere. You were on an island, you were thousands of miles away from anybody, you know, and you knew that if you're in a prisoner of war camp, well, you were reasonably safe. You would get some grub, where if once you got through that fence, you didn't know what to expect.
What was the first thing you did when you came back? What was it? Had there been any particular longing? Although it sounds like you were pretty eating the salmon and
yes, yeah.
And roast pheasant or whatever.
Oh, in our camp, between two of you, you had a electric hot plate, which was made out of old what do you call it? I can't think of the name. Plaster, sheets of plaster. You would soak it, cut a ring out of it, soak it, get it nice and get a pencil, mark it out for your coil, any sort of wire. We didn't care what it was, whether it was fused wire. We used to twist it in a pencil and line it round, make a connection. So you had your hot plate, your mate was next to you, they would have a hot. So when you were called drumming up, you would have rice, you would have peanuts, which we rolled with a bottle or a metal bar into powder and made our own coffee, which was made out. We used to roast the peanuts first and then roll it into powder, and that was our coffee. Boil rice, buy chickens with the cigarettes that were borrowed from the railway wagons.
What about a still? Did you have anyone who could get a still going?
Pardon?
A still, for making whiskey?
No,
Yeah.
no. The only chance we got to get whiskey was round about the last day of the war, when things were quiet. We'd done a railway wagon, seen these 50-gallon drums, and by accident somebody burst one of these open, and it turned out to be sake. So rather than pull it on its side to fill containers, whatever we could find, we just stuck a rubber hose in and sucked it out. And what with the strength of the sake, coming through a rubber hose like siphoning petrol out of a car petrol tank, and not being used to it. There was a few intoxicated prisoners of war that night, you know.
What's your one abiding memory of those years spent in captivity?
Coming
What is the one thing that stays with you above all others?
Coming down the gangway at Southampton on the QE2, and being met by my father. Funny enough, seeing him standing on the jetty, thousands of other people, and he was lighting a cigarette up, leaning against one of the supporting posts of the overhead construction, and watching him light a cigarette, I spotted him. And I turned round to one of the lads and said, "There's my dad."
What did you do? You go for a pint?
Well, I came down the gangway. I was fortunate in as much as far as I can gather, I was the first one down the gangway of prisoners of war, and I was carrying 2 kit bags. And I got about the second or third rung off the bottom of the gangway, and I tripped up. And by this time, my dad says, "I'll pick them up." My father was a big fella, about 6'2", weighed about 23 stone, you know. And he just picked these bags up as if, you know, no bother at all. We went into a wagon, and it took, I think it was either the Great Western or the South Western Hotel in Southampton. And we'd done a sort of information bureau up one side, across the top, down, telling these people who were taking particularly your name, number, when you joined up, when you were, where you'd been, how long you'd been in the forces, etc. And all these people that you were given particulars some weren't even had left school, you know. And when you come to the end of the queue, they said, "Well, that's it." And I says, "Well, what happens now?" I said, "How do I get home?" They said, "Oh, you'll have to find your own way." I said, "What, after 4.5 years, prisoner or 7 or 8 years abroad, I've got to find my own way home?" "Oh, we know what you mean. You want a railway warrant." So I had to wait while they worked out whether they were going to give us a railway warrant or not. And eventually we come round. We went to Euston Station with my dad and a Scotch lad called MacDonald. We went in the bar there at about 6 o'clock. We were still there at 9:30. My dad was telling us to take it easy. He was drinking Bass. I was drinking the equivalent of Newcastle brown ale, I think it was. We were just drinking it like water. He says, "You've been a prisoner of war, you're not used to it." I says, "I'll get used to it, you know." Sorry, I said MacDonald. It was Jock McCann. He was a Navy lad, and he went to Dundee, I think it was. And we parted, and I never heard a word from him. And I went on that train. My dad had said he'd heard something about repatriated prisoners of war. That everything was laid down for them. When we got to the platform, there was a military police parading up and down, hundreds of soldiers with their kit bags and their kit, all looking at this train, you know, and all had RP on the coaches. And my dad went to the sergeant of the military police. He said, "Excuse me, Sarge," touched his hat leg because he was a military man. He says, "I've reason to believe that the prisoners of war have got some special travel arrangement." He says, "Oh yes, sir. That's what them compartments are, RP, repatriated prisoners." He says, "Well, there's only one." And I think it was about 3 coaches. You know, they must have expected more. And we travelled to, I went to Holyhead actually, because my dad and my mum had retired. My dad was born in Wales, in Anglesey, and that's where they'd made their home. So he travelled from Anglesey down to Southampton. I travelled back with him. When I got to the village where they lived, The street was all done. It was only like one main street. Flags out, welcome home, run. You know. The local taxi man, who was a friend of my father's, he'd come to Holyhead, which was about 17, 18 miles away, with his taxi, picked us up, and we'd travel back, and he wouldn't pay for it anything. And for about 3 weeks I was with my mum and dad, and I came home, met my girlfriend, which was in the December, and then in the January we got married. We came into Gateshead, got married, and I went back to Anglesey for my honeymoon.
When you look round at the state of the country these days, do you ever wonder to yourself whether it was all worthwhile?
Well, there's at times, most of the times I wonder. For instance, I sometimes think that people talk about